This morning, it's particularly interesting to me to be able to share with you a little bit of the journey that hundreds of employers around the world are embarked on that deals with a very small part of the HR landscape, which is the candidate experience. So it is a small part of the overall look at HR technology, but I have to tell you, it has some messages for everyone as it relates to that. And I'd like to kind of engage you a little bit around some pieces of the data that we've gotten from that over the last 4 to 5 years. When I look at this issue, I'm looking at a two-sided coin. Candidate and customer are key issues here. And the reason why I set that up this way, and that's the theme that I wanted to look at, is because when I look back over the last 15 years, candidate experience was really not trending. In fact, if you started talking about candidate experience 15 years ago, people would laugh a little bit. And if you ask them why, it's because they could not connect it to their compelling business reasons for why they would really care about treating candidates differently than they do. It may have made common sense, but there was no real rationale to do it. I think there's two things that changed that 15 years ago. One was the rise of social media, which continues to this day and amplifies the ability of candidates now to have a strong and very powerful voice about what's happening to them. But the second, I think, is the more important one, and in my opinion, it was an article written in Harvard Business Review by Fred Richfield, who wrote about the Net Promoter Score and talked about customers and the impact that had sparked an extraordinary discussion that continues to this day and a debate about how we think about how customers affect us and our businesses. And I extend that to candidates now as well, because what it taught us is to take what our marketing colleagues have been doing and begin to think about how we measure, how we define, and how we understand the relationship to changing attitudes and behavior of candidates. And that's really where the power comes. And I think that it raises the broader issue for all of technology in terms of how we think about data and how we use it to really consider how we meet the needs of the stakeholders in our processes, whether they're employees or candidates. I want to be able to talk to the candidate piece to this. One simple example I'd give you is about 10 years ago, I did a survey of 100 large corporations, all of whom had ATSs. And all of the ATSs had the ability or the feature to be able to close a job by informing every single candidate who had applied during the course of that job. 10 years ago, 85% of all of the companies that were surveyed had turned it off. They didn't know what to do with it. They were afraid of compliance issues. They weren't sure that their recruiters would do it consistently. They had any number of different excuses around that. That was 10 years ago. Today, of the 200 companies who today are participating in North America in the Candidate Experience Awards, 85% have it turned on. And the reason they have it turned on is because they know its impact on the candidates, they know how it changes their attitudes and behavior, and they know how it impacts the bottom line of their corporation. The 15% who are participating in the Candidate Experience Awards who do not have it turned on, they're also learning that information as well. They will be getting extraordinary amounts of data, and I do want to share a little bit of that with you. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about customers, because customers are a key issue here. You all can smile at this particular slide. This is my absolute favorite slide. I use it in a variety of different ways, and I could spend a good deal of time, but I want to get Josh Burson up here on this before I do. I can look at the 5 factors that impact how you will be rated by your candidates just from these slides and talking about customers. But I'm going to talk very quickly about 2 of them. When we extend the idea about customer, all of us are customers. We may not remember the last time we were a candidate, or we may not want to remember the last time we were a candidate. But I have to tell you, when you're a customer and you walk in here, the first thing that I would point out to you is this message: we waited 30 minutes, no service. I find that fascinating. I don't know about you, but this is sort of an American diner. And if I walked into that diner, there's no way I would have waited 30 minutes. This is a very patient person. You have to think about that. Expectations is a critical factor in how we rate the experience that we had. If you do not set and deliver expectations, you will be absolutely rated less. What are we setting expectations about? We're setting expectations in a variety of different ways. We've learned, certainly, to do it about the jobs that we're going to engage the candidates about, but the main thing we're going to be doing is setting expectations about the process of recruiting. That in itself is a critical issue. And more we're seeing the technologies arise that help employers set those expectations more effectively if that's what they choose to do. Through Instagram, through mapping, through video, through all kinds of tools that are out there. This is a critical issue, and it's one of those 5 factors that is impacting how candidates rate you. There's one other piece that I'll point out. If you look in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, what you discover is that somebody actually was served. So here you are as a customer who has not been served, and you see that others have been. And I have to tell you that when you translate this to the candidate scenario, the perception of fairness about your recruiting process is an absolute critical component of how you build and design the tools, the information, and the openness and transparency of what you're supplying to candidates. It's a critical factor, and we need to be able to ask candidates about those issues. Perception of fairness is a very key issue, and I will tell you that one of the things we're finding is not only is there a host of areas in which candidates will rate you less, but there are several in which they will rate you more. So one of the things we've discovered is that those companies that are willing to have as the last question of their application, what didn't I ask you about your skills, knowledge, and experience that you would like to share with us now that make you more competitive for this job, actually is one of the key ways in which you can influence the perception of fairness about your process. And if you add to that your interviews, your phone screens, and all of those kinds of issues in doing the same exact thing, you have also increased your ability to increase the candidate's rating of you. In the end, what we really need is a balance of data and stories about how we execute against that data. It's not just the data, but we find that companies are different, not in the 5 things that we have, which is the expectations, the perception of fairness, the closure, which I mentioned earlier, holding recruiters accountable, and being able to listen and demonstrate that you've listened. Those issues significantly increase your ability to have a candidate experience that is extremely high and that relates to both attitudes and behavior downstream. I want to talk a little bit about the data that we've been collecting over the last 5 years. A company that is a nonprofit talent board was formed about 5 years ago in the United States. I want to tell you that what we do is free. It's an annual competition process. And in the last year, we had 200 employers in the United States who participated. 100 in EMEA and another 55 in Asia-Pac. But only about 3 or 4 companies from India participated. We would love to see more companies participate. Every company that did receive data back, not only their data, but the data of all their candidates, and a bench of the 50 companies whose candidates rated them the highest. Powerful set of information that allowed each of the companies to be able to take a look at the candidate experience that they were delivering, as well as the impact that it was having on their business processes as well as on their company performance. With those 200 employers last year, 130,000 candidate responses were obtained, looked at, analyzed. We have 3 universities looking at that from teams to do the research on that. I think it's a powerful opportunity. And I will tell you that today, this year, we are in the midst of the final part of the Candidate Experience Awards for 2016. There's 30 days to go. There's opportunity for companies to participate throughout the process. We are, for most part, we have over 250 companies who are receiving from their candidates fairly comprehensive surveys that we will be able to aggregate and supply back to them. And we're getting those surveys in at the rate of about 10,000 a day, every day for the last month, and we expect every day during the course of this month. It's nearly 500,000 surveys. And I got to tell you, it's the biggest collaboration of companies that we know of at any point in the world producing data for their benefit. And at no point have they been charged. These are the companies that won in the past year. Some of them you may recognize, many of them you may not have not recognized. These are the companies just from North America. There's another group in Asia, and there's another group in EMEA. So I want to give you some observations relative to some of that data and its impact. We asked the candidates, the 130,000 last year, how likely are you to apply again? What we learned is that if they had a positive experience, 62% would be willing to apply again. If they had a negative experience, a quarter of them would never apply again. How powerful is that? I can take that data and I can start putting dollar amounts to it, especially if it's the data that you have. How likely are you to refer someone in the future? 78%, if they had a positive experience, would actively encourage others to apply. But if they had a negative experience, 40% would go out of their way to discourage others to apply. The friction that this causes you in your operation, your business processes, I think is extraordinary. How likely are you to continue a relationship? What we're uncovering is that about 25% of those candidates that had a bad experience in looking at a job would stop buying your products. Another way to take a look at what the cost is to it. I will tell you, one of the things Hilton did was invest significantly in a small group of candidates that are veterans returning from around the world. They had a white glove treatment of those candidates, and what they discovered is that over the following year, those candidates they did not hire spent another $113 million with Hilton than they had the year before. I thought this was pretty impressive. So we're getting to the point where we are able to better understand and measure the cost of doing it poorly and the reward of doing it well. The influence is also expanding. How likely are you to share with your inner circle? What we find is that about 82% will share a positive experience, 65% will share a negative experience. That's double what it was 3 years ago. And publicly, 51% would share positive, and a third would share a negative experience. Now, what's counterintuitive is we found that millennials are less likely to share a negative experience, in part because they've been coached not to burn bridges. Boomers don't care anymore. So they do a lot more. We asked 25,000 finalists if they were invited to provide feedback. If you ask anyone for feedback about your process, it should be your finalists. 60% said, no, I was never asked. An immediate opportunity. When you were informed you were no longer being considered, how was that done? Nearly 60% received an email from a do not reply address notifying me. Not so good. I will say, though, that this group had only 20% of the candidates say they never got any response whatsoever. And that is key. That is very key, because what we're finding is that the longer you take to inform candidates that they did not get the position, the lower your rating will drop. And it will continue and impact you in the long run. We also are able to show high correlations in terms of holding candidates accountable, or holding recruiters accountable, for the candidate experience. The more we do that, the higher the rating you get, and that's pretty much an obvious. I would encourage you to take a look at thecandies.org. We have many different reports there, and you should be able to enjoy them to your heart's content as it relates to both the stories about the companies that are doing that and how they're executing, as well as the data that we discovered. In summary, when I look at technology down the road, I think there's a couple different paths where we're starting to try to look at the stakeholders within the process and better understand how we can apply technology to that process. But the problem is, if the technology vendors are not really understanding how the practices are evolving, those paths continue to diverge. Another way of saying that is we're now at a fork in the road. That's supposed to be funny. I will say that when we look at the two-sided coin, if we have quality data and we can match it to the practices that the stakeholders need, the technology will be as one, and that's really where the power is. On that basis, good hunting. Thank you very much.